back in college, man.
Like Mentos.
Just destroying your organs, man.
People need to understand that
you might need a new kidney, but it's okay, LeBron. You can buy a new kidney.
The conversation during the breaks is like it should just be a podcast, everybody. I'll just reveal that much. But let's get into some NBA as we saw the Lakers lose yet again without LeBron, without Anthony Davis, and there is a trade deadline coming tomorrow, so we bring in Woj to talk with us about this. And just want to let you know the NBA is on ESPN Radio. Tune in tonight. The Jazz host the Nets, presented by Indeed. Coverage begins at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on most ESPN radio stations. So, Woj, good to talk to you again. I'm asking this from a selfish point of view. What's the latest on Lonzo Ball and possible destinations for him?
Well, listen, Lonzo Ball did not reach agreement with New Orleans on his rookie contract extension before the season. He'd be a restricted free agent after the year. And, I think there's a sense on both sides that a new home would make sense for him. Chicago's a team to watch here. They need a point guard. They have, I think for Ball's side, it's a place with some young talent, Zach LaVine. A group in Chicago under Billy Donovan that you've seen grow this year in his first season as coach. Philadelphia, I know, has reached out. They've been in the market for a point guard. I think Philly's more of a long shot for Lonzo Ball. But I do think that there's a pretty good chance he moves before Thursday's trade deadline. There have, again, been talks with the Bulls. That's certainly going to be one to watch.
Okay.
Now, it's crazy, right? We expect, Oladipo. We've heard Lowry. We heard about Ball. But a name that we hadn't mentioned until very shortly is Aaron Gordon. Where would he fit, and where would be some likely suitors for him?
Orlando's had talks really all over the league for Aaron Gordon. In the last few days, certainly, the Boston Celtics, the Denver Nuggets. There had been some conversations with Houston, and I think it's even more wide open than that. I think they're going to keep taking offers in Orlando right up until Thursday's trade deadline. Listen, he has expressed frustration. They've had a lot of injuries in Orlando. I think he's been maximized under their coach, Steve Clifford, but you've seen Markelle Fultz lost for the year, Jonathan Isaac's lost for the year, two of their very best players with the Magic. This could possibly be, his final days in Orlando. But listen, they've kind of taken with some of this core team in Orlando, gone up to the deadline before, had a lot of talks with guys and held on to players. But I think there's traction now for Gordon to find a new home. Boston will be an interesting team here. They have the first-round picks that would appeal to Orlando, and I think trying to get 2 first-round picks for Gordon has been a priority for this front office.
Woj, I'm a huge Lakers fan, so forgive me for leading with my fandom, but with regard to the LeBron James injury, Frank Vogel earlier this week said that was going to impact what they did at the trade deadline. How active do you expect my Lake Show to be at the deadline, and who would be some of the prospective targets that they would go after?
Well, they've been real active. It's a question, I think, for the Lakers of whether they get some things done here before Thursday's trade deadline or go into the buyout market. And obviously in the buyout market, if you have the roster spots available, players who become free agents because typically they don't get traded at the trade deadline, it's a way to improve your team without losing anything. Andre Drummond is certainly at the top of that list from Cleveland. I think it's unlikely he's traded with his contract between now and tomorrow. And there'll be, listen, all the significant contenders, the Clippers and Lakers, Boston, certainly Brooklyn, some others around the league who will be real interested in Drummond come the buyout market. He very likely would be a starter in L.A. And they've talked about, some perimeter help around the league in their trade talks. And I think for the Lakers, you'll probably see them do most of their work, if not all their work, in that buyout market.
Kyle Lowry turns 35 tomorrow, trade deadline day. His name has been heavy in rumors with several different teams, including possibly going home to Philadelphia. And it feels like the Raptors might be ready as they look where they are in the standings and the season they've had in Tampa to maybe pull the plug on the season. So if there is a destination for Kyle Lowry, maybe a leading candidate, where would it be?
Well, certainly the Sixers, Heat have had interest, and those are teams that match up, where if he was going to leave Toronto, where he'd like to go. The one thing about Kyle Lowry and how Toronto is handling this process, they're giving him a voice in this. They're not going to send him somewhere he really doesn't want to go play. Masai Ujiri, their president, he really values.
And on this incredibly busy morning, to the big story in the NBA, LeBron James with a high ankle sprain that he suffered in the Lakers' 5-point loss to Atlanta on Saturday night. You saw it right there, the team announcing he will be out indefinitely. With both LeBron and Anthony Davis out with injuries, the Lakers lost again last night to the Suns, 111-94. Not surprisingly, they've struggled this year when both LeBron and AD are not on the court. In 463 minutes, the Lakers have been outscored by over 4 points, 100 possessions this season. And it looks like that's going to be the case now for some time. Here he is, our insider extraordinaire. Woj is with me. Woj, what is the latest we're hearing on LeBron and that injury?
Greeny, they're still evaluating that high ankle sprain, but I'm told that the Lakers are preparing for the possibility they could be without LeBron James for 3 weeks, even a month. That's a normal time frame for recovery for that injury, but they're still firming up a timeline. James has shown in his career incredible ability to recover quickly from injury and play through injury, but this one's not going to be so easy, and the Lakers, again, are preparing for the possibility. This is going to be weeks, not days.
All right, so weeks, maybe even as long as a month. Meanwhile, Woj, what do we know about Anthony Davis and when we should expect to see him back?
Well, he's still recovering from that calf injury. His timeline doesn't change because LeBron James is out. They're not going to rush him back. So he's still, I think, at least through the next week or two, as he starts to, as they start to test that injury. But the Lakers are preparing again to go into Thursday's trade deadline. Really looking more long-term with this team, trying to make sure that they can plug some holes for when they do have a healthy LeBron James and Anthony Davis back for the playoffs. But you heard Dennis Schroeder say it last night. This team's going to have to learn to play with some more pace, play faster, be scrappier on defense. It is a tall order for them to be competitive without those two players.
Yes, clearly. So that was going to be where I went next. The trade deadline is, as you just mentioned, on Thursday. How does this injury impact what we should expect to see the Lakers do?
I don't know that it impacts it, Greeny, because they know they're going to get both guys back, and they have to build a team and make moves that are designed for the long term, not for a short stretch of time here. Listen, the Lakers have been active in the trade market, but I think for them, the buyout market after the trade deadline is where they could really impact. And then you're adding players without having to lose anyone in a trade or have to trade out assets. Certainly, Andre Drummond remains a real big target for Lakers. If he's bought out, doesn't get traded here between now and Thursday. But this is a Laker team that, all of a sudden, if you're the Jazz or you're the Suns, you're a 1-2 seed, and all of a sudden you show up for the playoffs and there's a healthy AD and LeBron in the 7th, 8th seed. That's not exactly what you imagined earning a 1 or 2 seed to get, but that's how this may turn out.
That's exactly right. That will be one of the fascinating subplots of all of this. Where do the Lakers wind up placing in the playoff positioning, and how does that wind up, for lack of a better word, just destroying the season of somebody else who didn't deserve it? Woj, outstanding. Thank you. We will check back with you as further information becomes available. And obviously, that was another piece of news last night. If you're just waking up and had not heard, LaMelo Ball went down and he may not get up. He is the presumptive NBA Rookie of the Year. He has a fractured bone in his wrist, and we would expect him now to be out for the season. So we had that as well yesterday. Then we had this. Just wanted to finish up the NBA conversation with a moment of just absolute sensationalness. Look at this. Bam Adebayo up and throwing it down. He'd be called for an offensive foul, but it was still very much worth seeing. Very much worth seeing. Bam Adebayo throwing one down. DeMarcus Sabonis
are restricted as far as what their roster is going to be. They are basically going to have to ride it out with this group. They're taking on water right now, but they're still in good position. They're in that 3 seed. I don't see them falling back anywhere further than 6.
You mentioned LaMarcus Aldridge. You mentioned Andre Drummond. You could throw Kyle Lowry in there. Of those 3, which one could be on the move before Thursday's deadline?
I think it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on Kyle Lowry in Toronto. And I look at Kyle's situation there as almost having that no trade clause. If Kyle Lowry wants to get traded from Toronto, Kyle Lowry will get traded from Toronto. And they've lost 8 games in a row. They're 2.5 games out of even the play-in tournament right now. They've got Norman Powell, who could be a free agent this summer also. But Lowry is the name to keep an eye on this week.
Averaging over 17 points and 7 assists in his 9th season with the Raptors. Bobby
approaches. Are there roster tweaks coming? I asked LeBron about what it's like to live through trade season last night. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Teams are always just trying to figure out a way how to get better, especially the ones that believe they can make a run for a championship. So that's the way it's always been not always, but for the last, 5 to 7 years, 10 years of my career, with the trade deadline and the buyouts and things of that nature. So it's 10 days. There's going to happen really fast, so we see what happens over the next 10 days.
So, Dave, look, it's changed. When he said, for the last 5 or 10 years, when LeBron started, trade season transactions were not as crazy, but they are crazy now.
Yes,
so who are the top trade and buyout candidates for the Lakers as we approach this March 25th deadline?
Well, I'll start by saying, based on the Lakers roster construction and where they're going to be at salary cap wise, it's going to be most likely buyout candidates over trade targets for the Lakers, because if they were to do away with some of their young talent in order to pursue a trade, they're going to be in a tough situation this summer moving forward. But let's start with 3 names. Andre Drummond of the Cleveland Cavaliers, who's been parked on the bench for about a month now as they try to pursue trade targets. And I'm hearing that the Cavs are receiving interest in them, but because he has such a high salary number, it's going to probably be tough for them. Perhaps need a 3-team scenario in order to get that trade. Otherwise, it would be a buyout. Let's go to J.J. Redick of the Pelicans, whose shooting percentage is down a little bit this year, only shooting 36% from 3, but he's one of the true pure shooters in the game, and someone, at this stage of his career, trying to get that championship. Last year was the first year of his career he missed the playoffs. And we don't know how much time he has left, and we'll see if he gets dislodged from the Pelicans.